In this video, we're going to cover how to create recurring transactions, such as your monthly rents, could be your utility bills, mortgage payments, anything that's recurring, either an expense or a revenue. We're going to specifically cover rents because that's a common use case. However, I'll let you know that when you create a lease entry for your tenants, the software is automatically going to create a lot of what we're going to do today manually. We're just doing it manually so that you have a full understanding of the system, and because rents is a common recurring transaction. But you could do this for anything you want. So the first thing we're going to do is go to the accounting section and go accounting entries, and then you'll see it's divided into three parts. Accounting entries is your main table. It's where all your transactions are recorded. It's what everything you've approved. All the accounting reports are based off that. These are basically your accounting entries. After that, we have two other sections called suggested and scheduled. And scheduled is where you define when a transaction will be recurring. So for example, you'll say, I want a monthly rent starting on the 1st of January. And so that's where you would create that. And then what happens is every month on the 1st, the software will create a suggested accounting entry for you to approve and agree that yes, this is what I want, and accept it. Now, it doesn't automatically, when you create a rent, it doesn't automatically push it into your main accounting entries table because, as we all know, not all tenants pay on time. Some tenants don't pay at all. So your expected rents may not be paid as expected. And so we have to put them in a middle area where you have to approve, basically a placeholder until you've approved that transaction. So let's go through the steps. Let's start with the first one. Let's create a scheduled entry. And before I go too far, just so you're aware, not all entries have to be scheduled. If you have a one-time payment, say fixing a toilet, you would just create an accounting entry. You wouldn't go through all these steps. This is just for recurring entries. So again, we're here. I'm going to create a new one. And for people who aren't familiar with the accounting system, you can go to the other videos we have on YouTube and you can see all the different parts of the accounting system and go through that. But for now, I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to create, say, rent for John. Now, every field is optional. You can decide which ones you want to fill in, which ones you want to leave empty. But for now, we're just going to fill some of them. So I'm going to say John pays a rent of $1,000. I'm going to put it's going to my checking account by default. Now, this doesn't mean it's going to go in my checking. This means by default, I want it to automatically go in my checking. If it changes, then I can just edit the entry before I accept it. So basically, where it's in the placeholder, before I approve it, I can make some modifications. So I can say generally he pays, say, by check. It could be a debit transfer, money transfer, whatever it is. So I'm going to use the most common one that John will pay, just because that way I don't have to edit it unless he does something different. Now it's going to be a rent, so I'm going to type it in as a rent. And again, it could be a revenue, it could be an expense. In this case, because it's a rent payment, there's no vendor, so we're going to skip that. And I'm going to take John, and it's automatically picked the building. I can put a note, but I don't need to at this point. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to backdate it so we have more data. And I'm going to go over a few things here. So I'm going to backdate it to January 1st. And if you have a prorated rent, that's not taken care of here. That's taken care of in the lease section. So when you create a lease, you can click on a check mark and say this is a prorated rent, in which case the software will automatically prorate the first entry for you to approve. But in this case, we're doing it manually, so we don't need to do that. So I'm going to save this entry. And if I go to my list, I can see that I have my rent for John, and it's going to be scheduled every month. Although this is another video, I'll just quickly let you know that you can right-click on the table. You can decide which columns you want to appear, so that if you want to see the tenant of the building, you have all the different options. All right, so I've got my rent for John starting on January 1st. So I am now going to go to the suggest entries, and because at the time of this video it's July, I'm going to see a suggested entry for January, February, March, April, May, June, and July. So they're all my entries. Now they're all red because they're late. Right now it's the middle of July, so the software is set up by default to show red after 7 days, and so they're all late. If let's say I did one for it was August, then it might show green, meaning that it's not yet due. But in this case, they're all red. So now to process these entries to approve them, right? So if I go to my accounting table, I don't have any entries because I have to approve them. So just to reiterate, this is where I've scheduled it. I said I want an entry, a rental payment every month. And then they've now been generated in the suggest entries, the placeholder, for me to approve before they go to the main accounting table. Just because the rents might not all be paid, we don't know what could happen. So the first example is I could say, yes, this rent was paid on time. It's paid on the date that it was due. Everything's good. I don't need to change anything. Then I can just click accept over here on the right. And if I accept it, you'll see that it says it's been accepted, it's been processed and approved. And if I go to the main accounting table, I can see that the rent has been paid on the 1st, and it was due on the 1st and paid on the 1st. So alternatively, another option I can do is I can say, okay, this is due on the 2nd, or on the 1st of February, but he actually paid it on the 3rd. So I can double click, and I can go here and just change this to the payments on the 3rd. And then if I click on the accept button here, it's going to accept my change and show it on the accounting table. So if I go back here, I see that this payment, February 1st, was paid on the 3rd. So again, if I just need to make a quick modification and say, the date wasn't exactly accurate, it was actually this date, I just go in here, click the date the actual payment was on, and click accept. Now, what we generally recommend to save you even that, because it's still a couple clicks, is that you process your rents the day they're due, or the day that you accept the payments. So let's say, because we recommend this, because you can just say, let's say here, I go here, I click these two, I can click on the button today. And what that does is it's going to change the date paid to today's date automatically. So I don't have to go in, double click, say it was today, double click, say it was today, double click, it was today. I can just one time select them all and click today. And if I do that, it's processed both of them. And if I go to the accounting entry table, it's showing July 12th, which is today's date at the time of the recording. So it's edited them both for me on the fly. Now, if I want to make a more extensive edit, I can do click here and I can do edit. And this gives me the ability to edit everything. But if I just want to make some simple edits, it's often easier to just, I processed it as late. My apologies. I wanted to press list. I can just, double click. I can add a little more description. John paid whatever I want. Okay. Now you can also delete it. That's the other option too. You say, no, I don't actually approve of this. This isn't what I wanted. Just get rid of it. And then, so what we say is that as you're processing your rents and you're processing all your recurring transactions, when everything is done and you're past your grace period, let's say it's 5 days, now I'm on the 6th day, I want to mark all these as late. So what I would do is go up here, select them all, and I click on the late button. And what late does is it removes the date paid and the amount paid. It basically means they're outstanding balances. So I'm going to click on late. And they've been processed. All my rents are processed now. I've approved everything. And I could have deleted some. So now if I go to the entries, here are the late ones that I processed. I just did 2, but I had done 1 accidentally before. So that's why we have 3. You'll notice that the date paid is empty, meaning it hasn't been paid yet. And if I go over here, I can see that the amount paid is empty. It hasn't been paid yet. So these are now late payments, and they'll show up in the late reports. They'll show up as late payments in the tenant statement. They'll show up everywhere as late entries. And of course, they show up at the top here and in green, or in red, because they are late. If they were early, they would be green. So there we have all the entries. And I can, apply a payment. I can edit it here and say they've paid it. I can edit the entry. If there's a partial payment, I can click on the partial payment button over here. I can do anything I want. So those are the options. Now, a couple other quick little tips before I end the video. Let's say I've created a one-time entry, and I've created something called lawn maintenance, and we'll say it was done today. Why not? And we'll say the lawn maintenance cost me $150. And I'm going to leave all of this empty just to make it quick. We're going to do maintenance just to make it quick. So I'm going to save this. I'm not assigning a building anything. Normally you would do that, but I can do save. So the reason I'm doing this is if I go back to the list view, I've got my lawn maintenance over here. I'm not sure which entry, so I'm just going to search. I can go here, and then I can say schedule it. And if I schedule, So the reason you'd want to schedule it is maybe you created the entry at one point and then you realize, actually, I'm going to go with this service and I'm going to do it monthly. You can go in here and create a scheduled entry, but why not save yourself some time and just schedule it from from an existing one? So I can say, lawn maintenance, I'm going to call it recurring, so it's easy for us to see. And I can say it's going to be starting from May. The dates I'm putting here don't make sense, but for the purposes of the example, I'm going to put backdated so we have entries. So if I save this and I go to my scheduled entries, you can see that I have my lawn maintenance is going to be recurring starting on May 1st, and I've got my rent for John. And if I go to my suggested for approval, I can now see that I've got my lawn maintenance payments for May, June, and July, because we're now in the middle of July. And then, assuming I paid them on time, I can just accept them all. And if I go to my main table over here, I've got my lawn maintenance over here. I'm just going to the original one that I created manually, the one-time entry, and then all my recurring ones because I've now scheduled it. So again, just to repeat, we've got the accounting entries, we've got the main accounting table where we put all our accounting data. Then we have the schedule where we define what we want to be recurring. So I want to say I want a monthly rent, I want a monthly lawn maintenance entry, and so on. And then we have the suggested that's where the software will generate them. It doesn't put them in your main table because they may not be valid. Your tenant might not pay their rent on time. They might not pay it at all. So we put it in a middle placeholder for you to approve the entries, the recurring entries, before they're put in. And again, just to reiterate a second time as well, the software is going to create for you scheduled entries based off the lease information. So when you create a lease, it's going to create a scheduled entry for you for the rent to save you from having to manually create the scheduled entry. It's the same data, it's the same information, so it's going to do it all for you. I will, however, let you know that if you create a lease and the software creates a scheduled entry, so let's say your monthly rent, if that lease terminates, the software is not going to delete the scheduled entry. You have to manually delete it. And we do that because we have a lot of customers who will say create a year lease, and then the tenant transitions to a month-to-month lease, but they forget to create a new lease for the month-to-month. They just, we forget. And if the software automatically deleted the scheduled entry, then they would no longer have the suggested entry, and they may miss a rent. So we'd rather you have to delete something than miss a rent. And so just remember that if you create a lease and the lease terminates, that you do have to delete the scheduled entry. Otherwise, it'll keep going and it'll keep creating new suggested entries. And that's a safety precaution just to prevent people from missing data. And on that note, we've covered everything from scheduled entries. And again, if you have a one-time entry, you would go to the accounting entry and just directly add it in here. So for example, I would, fix toilet and then enter in all the data. I'm not going to create a scheduled entry for a single one-time fixing of a toilet or repairing a faucet or anything like that. It's only for recurring entries, this video.